I didn't come back for the cake or the champagne. I came back because my mother finally said it out loud right in front of everyone who mattered to her. "What is a lowly soldier like you doing back here?" Polite laughter scattered across the room. My father stared into his drink like it could hide him. My sister's smile froze under her veil. And her groom went white so fast I thought he might faint. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me. Like he'd just realized his future was standing in the aisle in a uniform he couldn't afford to misunderstand. Then he shouted, "Shut up, this is—" But you can't understand that moment until you understand what they took first. I was 18 when my parents taught me their favorite lesson: independence was only for the child they didn't want to pay for. It happened at our kitchen table in a split-level house that always smelled like lemon cleaner. I laid out my acceptance letter, the aid package, the tuition bill, neat, hopeful, terrified. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just said I need help. I can't cover this semester. My mother didn't even glance at the papers. She kept peeling a clementine like we were discussing groceries. "You'll figure it out," she said. "That's what being an adult is." My father sat at the end of the table with his laptop open, doing what he did best, acting busy, so he didn't have to choose. I looked at him. "Dad." He lifted his eyes for a heartbeat. "Your mom's right," he said, and went back to the screen. No plan, no questions. No, "We'll make it work." Just a clean sentence that made it clear I wasn't a daughter to be supported. I was a cost they didn't want. They called it being independent, like it was a virtue they were gifting me. A week later, my sister Ellie came home crying because her car was embarrassing. She was 16, pretty popular, practiced at getting sympathy without asking for it directly. She talked about homecoming, about photos, about how everyone would see her. By Friday, there was a nicer car in the driveway. Not luxury, just newer, safer. A good deal, my father said, proud of himself. My mother handed Ellie the keys like it was a ceremony. "You deserve the best," my mother told her. I stood in the doorway and watched the hug, the laughter, the gratitude. No one looked at my tuition bill sitting on the counter like a dead thing. That's how it worked in our house. They didn't have to announce a favorite. They showed it in receipts. That summer I tried anyway. I enrolled. I worked weekend shifts at the grocery store, then nights when they'd let me. I ate the cheapest food I could find. I did the math so often the numbers started living in my head. Halfway through the semester, my financial aid got adjusted because of a clerical error, one of those small bureaucratic shifts that can collapse a life if you're already hanging by a thread. I needed a few $1,000s within 2 weeks. So I went back to that kitchen table with the new paperwork. My mother didn't let me finish explaining. "No," she said. "If we help you now, you'll never learn." I said quietly, "You're paying for Ellie." My father finally spoke like he was offering balance. "We can't pay for 2 colleges. "That's funny," I said, "because you didn't pay for mine." My mother's eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "Ellie's different. College matters for her." For her. My future wasn't an investment, it was an inconvenience. That night in my childhood bedroom, I realized something that made my chest go calm in a way grief never does. They didn't love me the way I'd been trying to earn. They loved me most when I needed nothing. In the morning, I withdrew. Officially, quietly. I signed the forms, watched my student account freeze, and felt a strange relief, like closing a door before a storm could blow it off the hinges. I packed my things into 2 plastic bins and a duffel bag. I didn't announce it. I didn't argue. I just moved. My mother watched me load my car and said, "So you're giving up?" I didn't even turn fully toward her. "I'm choosing something that won't depend on you," I said. My father came outside, rubbing his forehead like my life was a headache. "You don't have to do this," he said. "What are you offering?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence had always been his real answer. I left. The recruiter's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a phone repair place. Inside, it smelled like carpet printer ink and stale coffee. A faded flag stood in the corner. The fluorescent lights made everyone look tired. The recruiter was a chief petty officer named Morales. He didn't flatter me. He didn't promise adventure. He asked why the way someone asks to see your spine. I told him the truth that mattered. I want a life where the rules don't change depending on who's favored. He studied me for a long second, then slid a form across the desk. "This isn't a rescue," he said. "This is work." "I'm not asking to be rescued," I said. The paperwork was endless. Medical history, Background questions, fitness standards, dates, signatures. A system that didn't care about my feelings, which for the first time in my life felt like safety. When he asked about family support, I almost laughed. He meant the people who show up, the people who call the people who don't let you fall all the way. I'm good, I said. Morales didn't smile. Then you'll need to be tougher than good. I started training the same day, not because it was inspirational, because it was necessary. I ran until my lungs felt raw. I did push-ups in ugly sets, then uglier sets. I learned what it meant to keep going when no one was watching, when there was no applause, when the only witness was your own refusal to quit. A week later, I went to MEPS before dawn, sitting on a plastic chair with strangers who avoided eye contact the way people do when they're all scared of the same thing. Blood draw, hearing test, vision chart. A doctor lifting my eyelids like I was equipment. At the end, I raised my right hand and repeated an oath that sounded older than my whole family. It wasn't romantic, it was precise. And for the first time, a commitment didn't feel like a trap. When Morales asked what I wanted to do, I didn't say anything. I said I want the hardest program you have. Not because I craved pain, because I craved proof. SEAL was a word that meant standards, not favoritism. Earned, not granted. A place where nobody cared who my parents loved. Ellie called once late, her voice bright with music in the background. Mom said you dropped out, she said. Is that for real? It's for real, I said. What are you going to do now? I pictured her telling my mother and my mother laughing like my pain was a phase. I pictured my father's careful silence. I pictured them turning my plan into a joke before it had a chance to become anything. So I said I'm going to be fine and ended the call. That was the first time I chose silence as strategy. Because I'd learned something in that kitchen: if you hand certain people your truth too early, they don't protect it. They test it. They poke it. They break it to prove they were right about you. I wasn't giving them that anymore. 9 years later, in a wedding venue full of chandeliers and fake warmth, they would call me lowly. And they would have no idea they were talking to the person who could change the groom's life with a single signature. But back then, in that strip mall, all I had was a pen, a stack of forms, and a calm decision I made without them. I signed my name anyway. Pain didn't leave when I did. It just changed jobs. At boot camp, nobody cared why I was there. They cared if I was late, if my bunk was tight, if my boots were clean, if my voice was steady when I answered. The rules were blunt. The expectations were visible. It was the opposite of my childhood. That first winter, I learned how exhaustion strips you down to whatever is real. There's a point where your muscles shake, your thoughts blur, and the only thing that keeps you moving is something quieter than motivation. Not pride, not anger, just refusal. People imagine transformation as a cinematic montage. It's not. It's repetition. It's cold mornings and anonymous effort. It's being average until you're not. SEAL pipeline selection didn't care about my family history. It cared about numbers, endurance, composure under stress. Water was its own language. Fatigue was constant. Doubt was everywhere, mostly internal. The instructors were professionals at indifference. If you wanted sympathy, you'd joined the wrong universe. Why are you here? One of them asked during a brutal evolutions week when sleep was rationed like a luxury. Nobody answered out loud. We were too busy trying not to collapse. But I had an answer. Because I needed a world where fairness wasn't a slogan. Because I needed to know that effort actually counted. Because I needed to belong somewhere that didn't measure my worth against my sister's smile. I never said it. You don't narrate your pain there. You carry it like extra weight and hope it doesn't drown you. Years in the edges changed. Training became operations. Chaos became responsibility. The body hardened first. The mind followed slower, more carefully. I learned that competence is quieter than confidence. That fear doesn't vanish, you just stop negotiating with it. And somewhere along the way I developed a reputation I never aimed for: controlled, precise, unreadable under pressure. Stone-faced, one teammate joked. It wasn't stone, it was discipline. Silence, I discovered, unnerves people more than defiance. My parents resurfaced in my life the way they always had, only when they needed something. The first call came 3 years after I left. My mother's voice was sugar-sweet, as if we'd spoken yesterday. We're so proud of you, she said. I waited. A pause. Then Ellie's tuition went up unexpectedly. There it was. Not how are you, not we miss you. Just the familiar pivot toward Ellie. I can't help, I said evenly. Oh, don't be like that, she replied. We're family. Family. The word sounded almost fictional. My father took the phone. His tone was cautious, diplomatic, exhausted. Anything you can do would mean a lot. To whom I wondered. I'm deployed soon, I lied. Another silence. Then he sighed. Take care of yourself. Translation conversation over. I stared at the dead screen for a long time, feeling nothing dramatic. No rage, no tears, just confirmation. Distance had changed my life. It hadn't changed them. By year 6, my career shifted again. Operational excellence opens doors, but not the ones people glamorize. The real power sits behind desks, inside review boards, within administrative chains most civilians never notice. I was selected for a command staff assignment tied to personnel evaluation and security review work that sounded dull to outsiders and felt surgical to those who understood its reach. Clearances, suitability assessments, career impact decisions. No theatrics, no vendettas, just documentation evidence standards. A single recommendation could accelerate someone's trajectory or freeze it indefinitely. It wasn't authority you flaunted, it was authority you handled like live ammunition. My commanding officer, Captain Harris, was a man who spoke in sentences that wasted nothing. This position, he told me on my first day, is about judgment, not emotion. Yes, sir. You will see things people wish you wouldn't. I understand. He studied my file, then looked at me over his glasses. Your record suggests you do. Ellie re-entered my orbit through social media. A tagged photo, a smiling face I barely recognized. Engagement ring, beach sunset, caption full of exclamation points. I almost scrolled past. Then I saw his name. Daniel Whitaker. Something tightened, not emotionally, professionally. Because I knew that name. Not personally. Officially. Whitaker's file had crossed my desk 2 months earlier. Not as a problem, as a pending review. He was a rising officer candidate attached to a sensitive assignment requiring elevated clearance, strong performance metrics, clean record almost. Except for one unresolved financial anomaly flagged during routine screening. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic. But in my world, almost clean is a category that demands scrutiny. I pulled the file again. Same Daniel Whitaker. Same birth date. Same man about to marry my sister. For a long minute, I just sat there. Life has a way of staging coincidences that feel like accusations. The wedding invitation arrived a week later. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. My parents' names printed proudly at the bottom like sponsors of a narrative they'd curated for years. I hadn't spoken to Ellie in nearly a decade. I hadn't set foot in that town since the day I left. I hadn't planned on returning. But now the situation wasn't personal. It was structural. Because I was part of the review chain connected to Daniel Whitaker's clearance. Because professional ethics required neutrality. Because neutrality doesn't mean absence. It means presence without corruption. RSVP'd yes. The venue was exactly what my mother would choose, tasteful, expensive, slightly desperate to impress. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, smiling guests performing happiness like choreography. I arrived in dress uniform. Not for intimidation. For accuracy. Reactions rippled instantly. Whispers, glances, curiosity sharpened by discomfort. My mother saw me near the entrance. Her expression didn't flicker with warmth or surprise. Only irritation. Like an old inconvenience had reappeared. Well, she said as I approached, voice thin with forced politeness, you decided to show up. Ellie stood beside her, radiant, nervous, searching my face for something I wasn't offering. You look different, she murmured. So do you, I replied. My father hovered nearby, older, smaller, somehow eyes avoiding mine. Then my mother leaned closer, scanning my uniform with a dismissive curl of her lip. And said it. What is a lowly soldier like you doing back here? Not whispered. Not private. Loud enough. Cruel enough. Familiar enough. The laughter that followed was uneasy, scattered, reflexive. Ellie's smile cracked. My father froze. And across the room, Daniel Whitaker turned pale. Not because of the insult. Because he recognized me. Not as Ellie's estranged sister, but as the officer whose name sat on the review memo connected to his career. His glass slipped from his hand, and the music stopped feeling festive. He stared at me like gravity had shifted, then at my mother, then back at me, and I saw the exact second realization detonated behind his eyes. This isn't a guest. This is command. He stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. "Shut up," he shouted. The room went silent. Ellie whispered Daniel. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at my mother, voice shaking with disbelief and fury. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" My mother blinked, offended. And Daniel Whitaker, white-faced, said words that collapsed the entire illusion my parents had built. "This is Lieutenant Commander Carter." A beat. "My reviewing officer." Another beat. "The woman who signs off on my clearance." You could feel the air leave the room. My mother's face drained of color. My father's drink trembled in his hand. Ellie stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. And for the first time in my life, my parents looked at me without superiority. Only fear. Because revenge, I'd learned, doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it walks in wearing medals. I didn't react. That unsettled them more than anything Daniel had said. People expect anger, or triumph, or at least a flicker of satisfaction. They understand noise. They don't understand stillness. Daniel Whitaker stood there breathing hard, jaw tight, the shock still radiating off him. Ellie looked from his face to mine, confusion rising into something closer to dread. My mother recovered first, because humiliation has always triggered her survival instincts. "Oh, please," she scoffed, voice brittle. "Don't be ridiculous." Daniel didn't blink. "I'm not being ridiculous. You're making a scene at your own wedding." "No," he said coldly. "You did." The room remained silent, guests frozen between curiosity and the primal desire not to be near family implosions. My father stepped forward at last. "Daniel," he began carefully, palms raised, peacemaker mode, engaged decades too late. "Let's all just calm down." Daniel turned to him, eyes sharp. "Sir, with respect, this isn't something we calm down." That word respect hung in the air like evidence. Because he wasn't performing politeness. He meant rank. Ellie's voice trembled. "What is happening?" Daniel looked at her, then at me. Conflict tore across his face. Professional recognition colliding with personal catastrophe. "You didn't tell me," Ellie whispered. "I wasn't required to," I replied evenly. My mother's head snapped toward me. "Required," she repeated. "What kind of cold, arrogant—" Daniel cut her off. "Stop." The word cracked like a gunshot. Guests flinched. Ellie stared at him, stunned. My mother looked genuinely shocked, unused to being silenced by someone she considered socially inferior 5 minutes earlier. Daniel's voice dropped lethal in its restraint. "You will not speak to her like that." My mother laughed nervously, scanning faces for allies. "This is absurd. She's not just anything." Ellie's bouquet slipped slightly in her grip, and I watched realization begin its slow, merciless work. I hadn't planned theatrics, but I had planned truth, and truth once triggered moves with its own momentum. "Daniel," I said calmly. He straightened instinctively. Not dramatically. Reflexively. "Yes, ma'am." That did it. A visible ripple of disbelief spread through the room. My mother's mouth parted. My father's eyes widened. Ellie went perfectly still. Because whatever story they'd told themselves about me, whatever narrative of failure, rebellion, insignificance, it shattered in that single exchange. I think I continued, voice measured, "We should step somewhere private." Daniel nodded immediately. "Of course." My mother snapped, "No, whatever this is, it can be said right here." Fear disguised as defiance. I turned my gaze to her, and for the first time she looked away first. We moved to a side lounge off the main hall. Daniel closed the door softly behind us. Ellie remained near the entrance, pale, shaking. My parents hovered together now, a unit formed by crisis rather than love. Daniel spoke first. "I had no idea you were related." "I know." His throat worked. "If I'd known, it wouldn't have changed anything professionally." Ellie's voice broke. "Professionally." Daniel exhaled slowly, then faced her. "Ellie, your sister sits on part of my clearance review chain." Silence. Confusion. Then horror. My mother whispered clearance. My father said nothing, but his expression had shifted into the unmistakable look of a man recalculating reality. "This is insane," my mother said faintly. "You're telling me she can control your career?" Daniel's answer was quiet. "Yes." Ellie staggered back a half step. My mother's voice sharpened, desperate. "Well, then she needs to recuse herself immediately." I met Daniel's eyes. He didn't look hopeful. He looked terrified of the ethical implications. "She already did," he said hoarsely. Ellie blinked. "What?" Daniel swallowed. "When I recognized the name on the invitation list earlier this week, I notified my command." My mother stared. "Earlier this week?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She requested formal separation from my review process." All eyes turned to me. I said nothing. "Because dignity doesn't explain itself." Ellie's voice was barely audible. "You knew." "Yes." "And you didn't say anything." "No." "Why?" I looked at her for a long moment. Because this was the question that actually mattered. Because I said quietly I wasn't here to interfere with your life. Ellie's eyes filled instantly. Not with gratitude. With something heavier. Shame. My mother exploded. "Oh, that's rich. You walk in here, let everyone believe you're some mysterious decorated hero, and now you want to pretend you're being noble." Daniel snapped, "Ma'am." I raised a hand slightly. He fell silent. My mother glared at me. "You think this makes you superior?" "No." "Then what exactly is your point?" I reached into my uniform jacket. My father stiffened. Old fear patterns. Old expectations. But I only withdrew a thin envelope and placed it gently on the table. Daniel's face went tight. Because he understood paperwork. Understood consequences. Ellie stared at the envelope like it was radioactive. My mother crossed her arms. "What is that?" "My student loan history," I said. My father's head jerked. My mother scoffed. "That's ancient history." "No," I replied evenly. "It's active." Ellie whispered, "Why are you showing us this?" "Because I said calmly the debt exists for a reason." My mother rolled her eyes. "You dropped out." "Yes." "And joined the military." "Yes." "So whose fault is that?" I slid a second document from the envelope. My father leaned forward and went white. He recognized his own signature. Dated 9 years earlier. On a parent financial responsibility adjustment form. Filed after I had already withdrawn. Claiming funds had been redirected. To Ellie. Without my knowledge. "No," my father breathed. My mother stiffened. Ellie stared uncomprehending. I spoke gently, clinically. "You told the university you were still supporting me financially." My father shook his head violently. "That's not—" "You rerouted aid eligibility." "That's impossible." "It's documented." My mother's voice cracked. "Why would we do that?" I looked directly at her. "You didn't want 2 tuitions." Ellie gasped softly. My father sank into a chair. My mother's composure finally collapsed. Daniel whispered, stunned, "Oh my God." Because revenge, real revenge, isn't screaming. It's timing. And the quiet presentation of a truth no one can talk their way around. Nobody spoke. Not immediately. Shock has weight. It presses people downward before it lets them react. Ellie was the first to break. "That's not true," she whispered. But her voice lacked conviction. It sounded like hope trying to outrun evidence. My father still stared at the document as if it might rearrange itself into something forgivable. My mother's face had gone tight, calculating, cornered. Daniel looked between all of us, breathing unevenly, the implications landing one after another. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't dramatize. Because truth doesn't need performance. The aid recalculation, I said, calmly reduced my eligibility after withdrawal. Ellie's eyes flicked toward me, then away. My father rubbed his forehead, a gesture from my childhood, his universal response to anything inconveniently real. "There must be some mistake," he muttered. There wasn't. My mother snapped, "Why bring this up now?" Daniel turned sharply toward her. "Because it matters." She recoiled, slightly stunned that he'd contradicted her. "It was years ago." Daniel's tone hardened. "You financially benefited from misrepresenting support." My mother's eyes widened. "Excuse me." Ellie stared at Daniel, confused. "What are you saying?" Daniel hesitated, then answered with brutal honesty. I'm saying this could qualify as fraud. Silence detonated again. My father's head jerked up. Fraud, he repeated faintly. My mother's voice rose shrill. Oh, don't be dramatic. Daniel didn't flinch. I work in security compliance, he said evenly. Documentation like this isn't trivial. Ellie looked like she might faint. My mother rounded on me, furious now. You're trying to ruin this wedding. No, I replied quietly. I'm explaining my absence. That landed harder than accusation. Because it reframed everything. Not revenge. Context. Not attack. History. Ellie's voice trembled. You left because of this. I left because I understood my position. What position? I met her gaze. The expendable one. Ellie's breath hitched. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. My father looked like something inside him had cracked open too late to fix anything. My mother slammed a hand on the table. This is unbelievable. You disappear for 9 years, show up in uniform like some kind of statement, and now you're rewriting the past. I'm not rewriting anything. You dropped out? Yes. You chose that? Yes. Then stop blaming us. I held her gaze steadily. I'm not blaming you. She froze. Because my tone carried no heat. Only certainty. I'm holding you accountable. Daniel's spine straightened unconsciously again. Ellie stared at me, tears forming. My father whispered, broken. Why didn't you tell us? I almost smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just tired. Would you have listened? His silence answered. My mother's composure fractured completely. Oh, so now you're the victim. No. Then what? I'm the consequence. Daniel's head snapped toward me. Ellie inhaled sharply. My father shut his eyes. Because somewhere deep down he knew that sentence was true. I slid the envelope closer to Daniel. He didn't touch it. You're not implicated, I said. His eyes lifted quickly. Ma'am, You had no knowledge. Relief and horror collided across his face. Ellie whispered, Daniel, what does this mean? He swallowed hard. It means, legally this is serious. My mother scoffed weakly. No one's going to prosecute something ancient. Daniel didn't answer. Which was worse? Ellie turned to my parents, voice shaking. Did you do this? My father opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I didn't understand the form, he said hoarsely. My mother snapped, oh, for God's sake. Ellie shouted, Mom. The word tore out of her like something primal. Raw. Unrehearsed. I'm asking you a direct question. My mother's eyes flashed. Then flickered. Then hardened. We did what we had to do. Ellie recoiled as if struck. There it was. No apology. No denial. Just justification. Daniel whispered, stunned. At the expense of your daughter. My mother's reply was ice cold. She left. I answered quietly. I left after you closed every other door. Ellie sobbed openly now. My father looked decades older. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, shaken. This changes everything, he muttered. My mother snapped, it changes nothing. Daniel turned slowly toward her. Respect gone. Only clarity remaining. It changes how I see this family. That hit like a physical blow. Because social perception was my mother's true religion. Guests knocked softly at the lounge door. Concerned. Curious. Unaware of the tectonic collapse happening behind it. Ellie wiped her tears desperately. We can't do this now, she whispered. Daniel stared at her, conflicted, devastated. Ellie looked at me. Not with anger. With something far worse. Recognition. You didn't come to destroy this, she said faintly. No. You came to tell the truth. Yes. Ellie's shoulders sagged. Daniel whispered, Ellie. She shook her head slowly. I need air. And walked out. Veiled, trembling. World shattered. Daniel remained frozen. My parents sat in stunned silence. I gathered the documents calmly. Not rushing. Not lingering. Because revenge had already done its work. At the door, Daniel's voice stopped me. Ma'am. I turned. His face was pale eyes, heavy with the weight of a man whose wedding day had just become a reckoning. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For not knowing. That wasn't your responsibility. He nodded once, then added with quiet, devastating sincerity, You didn't deserve any of this. I studied him for a long moment, then replied, No, but I survived it, and walked back into the silent, whispering reception, where my parents now stood exposed under crystal chandeliers that suddenly felt far less warm. The music never really recovered. It resumed, technically, but the room had changed in ways string quartets can't fix. Conversations stayed hushed. Smiles looked rehearsed. People glanced at my parents the way Americans do when scandal enters a space, politely sideways, careful, fascinated. My mother stood near the bar, rigid, pretending nothing had happened. My father hovered beside her, lost, clutching a drink he hadn't tasted. Ellie was gone. Daniel stood alone near the edge of the dance floor, jacket, unbuttoned expression, hollowed out by reality, arriving all at once. I remained exactly what I had been since walking in. Composed. Because revenge when done properly doesn't require victory poses. Only patience. Ellie found me outside. The winter air was sharp, honest, indifferent. She hugged herself against the cold veil, removed makeup smudged in ways bridal magazines never show. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, Why didn't you hate me? The question caught me off guard. I did, I answered truthfully. She nodded slowly, absorbing that without flinching. But not forever, I added. Ellie's eyes filled again. I didn't know, she whispered. I know. They told me you just quit. I know. Her voice broke. I believed them. I know. Ellie let out a shattered laugh. You always do that. Do what? Answer like you're not trying to hurt anyone. I'm not. She looked at me, really looked. And for the first time since we were children, there was no competition in her eyes, only grief. I spent years thinking you abandoned us, she said quietly. I spent years understanding why I had to leave. Ellie's shoulders trembled. Those aren't the same thing. No, I agreed softly, they're not. Behind us, through tall glass windows, guests drifted like uneasy ghosts inside a celebration that no longer knew what it was celebrating. Ellie wiped her face. Daniel wants to postpone. That's reasonable. She nodded. I don't even know who I am right now. I studied her for a long moment, then answered with a gentleness my mother never offered either of us. You're someone who was loved unfairly. Ellie flinched at the precision of that. And someone who gets to decide what to do with that truth, I continued. She stared at the dark parking lot. Did you come here to punish them? No. Ellie turned sharply. Then why now? Because lies don't stay buried forever. She swallowed hard. And because Daniel deserved transparency before building a life inside something distorted. Ellie nodded slowly. Painful, but undeniable. Inside, Daniel approached my parents. I could see it through the glass. His posture was respectful but distant, now formal, in a way that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with disillusionment. My mother gestured sharply defensive. Daniel didn't react. My father sagged visibly. Consequences I'd learned arrive first as social gravity, then as legal reality. Weeks later, the investigation began. Not because I initiated it. Because documentation requires follow-up. Universities audit. Records surface. Paper trails speak. My parents hired an attorney. My mother framed it as persecution. My father aged 10 years and 2 months. Ellie moved into Daniel's apartment quietly, wedding indefinitely postponed, relationships strained but intact in that fragile, honest way that sometimes follows shared shock. I met my father alone one afternoon at a diner off the highway. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Morally. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I believe you. His eyes lifted, surprised. But you did, I finished. He nodded, tears forming. I thought, your mother handled those things. I know. I should have checked. Yes. I should have asked. Yes. I should have fought for you. A long silence. Then, yes. He cried openly. A 60-year-old man undone by clarity, arriving decades late. I don't expect forgiveness, he whispered. That's good. He winced. I leaned forward slightly. But I'm not interested in carrying this forever either. Hope flickered faintly. What does that mean? It means accountability isn't the same as hatred. Legal resolution came quietly. Restitution agreements. Financial penalties. No prison drama, this wasn't television. Just consequences measured in dollars, records, reputation, dignity. My mother never apologized. My father did. Repeatedly. Brokenly. Ellie did once. Softly. I'm sorry for benefiting from something I didn't understand. That matters, I told her. Revenge, I discovered, has a strange aftertaste. Satisfaction, yes. But also stillness. Because once truth lands, there's nothing left to anticipate. Only space. Only silence of a different kind. The last time I saw my parents together was at Ellie's small civil ceremony 2 years later. No chandeliers. No spectacle. Just honesty. My father hugged me like a man grateful for a mercy he didn't deserve. My mother nodded stiffly. Diminished. Changed not by remorse but by reality. Sometimes that's the closest thing to justice life offers. People ask if I regret going back. If revenge healed anything. If exposure was worth the wreckage. The answer is simple. I didn't go back for revenge. I went back for balance. For truth standing where lies once stood unchallenged. For dignity reclaiming its proper seat at the table. Ellie and I speak now. Carefully. Not as rivals. Not as strangers. But as two women shaped differently by the same flawed home. There is affection. There is distance. There is something like peace. My father writes letters. Actual letters. Ink on paper. Updates about ordinary things. Weather. Gardening. Regret woven gently between the lines like a language he's still learning. I read them. I don't always answer. But I read them. As for my mother, some people never surrender their version of the story. And strangely, that no longer troubles me. Because revenge isn't making someone feel guilty. It's making truth impossible to ignore. I built a life that did not depend on their approval. Daniel built a career that survived integrity. Ellie built an adulthood grounded in reality rather than indulgence. My father built finally the courage to admit what silence cost. My mother built whatever she can live with. And me, I kept the lesson they tried to weaponize. Independence. But I rewrote its meaning. Not abandonment. Not exile. But self-respect without permission. If this story stayed with you, sit with that feeling for a moment. Think about fairness. About the quiet damage of favoritism. About the cost of silence and the power of breaking it at the right time. If you believe stories like this matter, share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to hear more journeys of dignity, consequence, and hard-earned peace, stay with us.